Hello, I'm Sam, and today I want to talk about Tsukimisu's Shimeji Simulation. A weird and wonderful manga that ran from 2019 to 2023, I managed to hop right on at the very end. It can be a little confusing without context, though it's very good. I've read it through twice now. And I would like more people to read it, so ergo a video. With that, I will be spoiling Shimeji Simulation as well as Girl's Last Tour, another manga that Tsukimisu wrote. So if you don't want to be spoiled, go read them and then come back. But if you don't care, let's get into it. Let's talk about the main cast of characters. Which, if there are other characters that are important somehow, I will bring them up as they're needed. Shijima, or Shimeji, as she is called for pretty much all of this manga, is the main character.
Mushroom!
Are growing on her hair and she can't be bothered to get rid of them. She is a nihilist and she loves fish. All of those are excellent traits, and especially that loving fish part. That's pretty awesome. She is by far the best character and is an absolute unit. She has some great lines. Wonderful lines. For our second main character, both she and Shimeji are the main characters, but Majime. Now, I'll just read exactly what I have written down in my script for her. Happy, stupid egg. She is by far the worst character. Objectively, she is the worst character. That's not really saying much, because all the characters in Shimeji Simulation are pretty good. So, she's only bad by, that standard. So, it's not really annoying or anything. Just jeepers. Don't want to look at her, don't want to think about her. Look at that. Disgusting. Get it out of here. But either way, she is best friends with Shimeji and is pretty much the polar opposite to her. Super high energy and fairly creative. Big sis. She has glasses. She dropped out of university to focus on more important things. She would probably use Linux if it were available to her. And she is very intelligent and reclusive. She drives most of the story in Shimeji Simulation, so she will be brought up a fair bit. Sumida Senpai is next. Ugh. Honorifics, I don't like that. I'm American. We don't use honorifics. We don't use, I go ma'am, miss, sir. No honorifics here. She doesn't like to speak. She's very good at drawing, and is generally an absolute unit. I can't think of a bad time with her on screen. Even though she doesn't speak, very cool. And she's very close with our next character, Miss Mogawa. Miss Mogawa is the art teacher for their school. She is perhaps mildly depressed. She becomes obsessed with things very easily. Specifically, we see in Shimeji Simulation donuts and digging holes. Which, as a note, she is the advisor for the Hole Digging Club, which all of these main characters, save Big Sis, are a part of. Finally, we have Yamikawa Senpai. She loves books as well as her looks. She knows a lot about philosophy, and she is an adult who refuses to graduate. She drives the more philosophical aspects of Shimeji Simulation, and she has a lot of pretty good lines, so it's pretty cool overall. The art of Shimeji Simulation is weird and wonderful, and it's what initially drew me in. As I stated before, this piece specifically, I saw this and I was intrigued. I really wanted to know what the context for this is. I have it as the background on my phone right now. I really love it. The looks of the people, all the odd events, once the world's broken and when the creativity is loosed upon the world, it's very cool. It could have kept me reading, right? The visuals alone could have kept me reading, even though the story is what really kept me going as I was reading after I was drawn in initially. But I wanted to take a moment to appreciate the art, as well as define the word weird. So many wonderful words in our language are tarnished by careless use. I'm guilty of this too. I like clearly defined words, and I like words with very specific meaning. So, using the superior dictionary, the Webster's 1913 dictionary, what does weird mean? Well, I have two different definitions. Of or pertaining to fate, concerned with destiny, as well as of or pertaining to witchcraft, caused by or suggesting magical influence, supernatural, unearthly, wild. Now I love that. That is very evocative language. It's descriptive, it's nice. It's very nice. It does a grand job of encapsulating Shimeji Simulation's feel. Now then, I will give you a very abridged version of Shimeji Simulation's story. I won't be talking about everything in this section, but this and the next section should tie, hopefully, the rest of the video together. I'm not including everything, mostly just the important events for this section. There is a lot of slice of life sandwiched in between all of this, so there'll be a lot for you to read still if you decide to go read it. It's very good. But either way, after Shimeji and Majime meet, they join the hole digging club because everything else is too much work. A few chapters later, Shimeji meets the gardener. The gardener is small, carries a big stick, and corrects mistakes. The gardener is awesome, definitely the second best character, maybe even rivaling Shimeji for the first. Going on from here, Big Sis manages to finish her raw fish generator, which causes all these ethereal fish to begin floating around the atmosphere. She calls them fish with names and likens them unto souls. That she gives Shimeji and Majime drugs of some kind, and they enter a shared dream. And a note that will be important later, we discover that Majime has a lot of plushies, they all have names, and they are her friends. And as a quick Sam aside, the salamander and tetrapod are by far the best plushies she has. Anyway, the hole digging club begins to find stuff buried beneath the school, and Miss Mogawa becomes obsessed with hole digging. She wants to dig all the way down to Brazil, or beyond. However deep she can make the hole, she wants to make it. So, with the help of Sis, they make flounder blocks, which these blocks are alive in a sense. The concrete is, not the flounders. Either way, they utilize dynamic force to make a perpetual motion machine from these flounder blocks. And once the hole is super deep, Mogawa, Yomikawa, Shimeji, and Majime fall into the hole. And eventually they enter the gardener's room. The gardener is mildly annoyed, but sends them back up and fills in the hole. From here, odd events begin to happen in the world. The school is literally turned sideways. Gravity's normal on the inside, but the school's just now lying sideways. It goes from being very hot one day to snowing the next. Communication attempts begin manifesting physically. You know the eureka moment where a little light bulb forms above a cartoon character's head? Oh, that happens for real. A real little light bulb forms up there. So thoughts become reality when they're trying to convey something. Water begins to float, and it can connect via surface tension to various things. And we find out that all of these events have been caused by Big Sis messing with dreams. Not only her own, but by moving into others. She has discovered that reality and dreams are essentially equivalent. And because of that, she can make alterations to both. The gardener then shows up, tries to get her to stop. We find out that no one can really die in this world, so there's nothing much the gardener can do. She's very upset. She pleads with Big Sis not to do it, but Big Sis alters the world foundation, and now everyone can create anything they want and warp the environment to their will. People seem to adjust very quickly, and the landscape begins to warp and twist to accommodate the residents' new desires. There's a lot of hijinks in this new world for a while. The most interesting being Miss Mogawa now is officially allowed to drink on the job, which is very cool. Sis, while working on a formula to allow for better computing power in the world, it's a whole thing, accidentally manages to make a copy of herself. and discovers a way to allow humans to fundamentally alter themselves, for that's the one thing they were unable to alter with the initial change. And this copy, her only goal is to cause this change. So the gang is unable to stop her, and people gain the ability to alter themselves. With that, most people disappear, losing themselves in each other, and the world is completely destabilized and experiences periods of chaotic change and periods of stabilization. Shimeji and Majime, who were always together up until this point, split due to emotional circumstances. It should be noted unwillingly. So, now Majime wanders alone through the void and the chaotic mess that is the world. And eventually she stumbles across Big Sis, who is a raw fish. Big Sis has found a way to reverse everything by sacrificing herself. However, everyone is going to have to be alone. It's one big social distancing event, so they don't lose each other in themselves. In the end, Shimeji is alone for a very, very long time before she wanders onto a train and then through people's own little separate areas. Until eventually, she reunites with Majime. There is a lot of meaning in Shimeji Simulation, and it seems to confuse a lot of people, because it has to do with books that generally people don't read. At least that's what I seem to find. So I'll present my take on what's happening philosophically here, but I could very well be wrong, because I've mostly avoided staying away from forums, other YouTube videos, and the wiki, because I wanted to kind of have a pure take and try to figure out something on my own as to what's happening. So we'll see if I'm right. You can tell me down in the comments what you think. The only thing I've really been exposed to is the comments underneath each chapter on the various places in which I read Shimeji Simulation. And so most of those were just people being like, oh, I'm tripping. So, cheapers. Now, in chapter 15, Yamikawa offers up an idea of how to choose what to read next, right? So you have a book as your base, and then you imagine a tree growing out from it, and there are branching paths, and each of those branching paths is a book. Books that somehow connect in on your initial book. The example Shimeji Simulation chooses is to begin with, Thus spoke Zarathustra, and then two branching paths come out of it, one being the Bible and the other being no longer human. Now, these were not chosen at random. It's very important to the story, so I'll go over them very briefly and then tell you how I think they connect to what's going on here. Thus spoke Zarathustra is about Zarathustra. He goes up on a mountain to meditate and reach enlightenment, and eventually he decides that he is so wise he needs to come down from his mountain to help better the common man. He wants to help people. But on his way down, he meets an old man, and the old man inquires, oh, what are you doing? And he's like, yeah, I'm going down to share my wisdom with these people, because, I want them to become a better self. And the old man just kind of laughs and says, yeah, no, they're going to reject you. And that's more or less what happens to poor Zarathustra. Now, I actually haven't read this book. I've read a few summaries of it. It's on my list. It's a bit of a beast. But I do know Nietzsche, the man who wrote it, a very influential philosopher. And I know the concepts that the book is trying to convey, and that is existentialism. Life is inherently absurd and is meaningless. And this goes into Nietzsche's idea of the overman and the will to power, right? We as humans have to make meaning in our life. We make the meaning. There is a God-shaped hole in our hearts, and we have to find a way to fill it. Existentialism should not be confused with nihilism, because that's what separates it. Nihilism is life is inherently absurd and meaningless, and there is no point to trying anything. We cannot create meaning. No, that is not what Nietzsche is saying. That choice to find and make meaning is incredibly important. And we should see it more later. With that, we transition into No Longer Human, written by Osamu Desi. He is a very, very influential Japanese author. This book has sold very well in Japan. The book is about Oba Yozo, and in his life he almost makes no decisions for himself, and he just kind of goes where the wind takes him. He doesn't lead a very pleasant life. It's filled with various forms of violence and illicit relationships, and yeah, he has an internal mixture of fear and the inability to understand others, so he just follows their lead to try to fit in. In this way, he mirrors Shimeji, nihilism being kind of the connection between the two, right? She does what others tell her to do, really without thinking, so long as it's a decent, goodish thing. And internally, she constantly questions as to whether she fits in, and wonders about social norms. Now, Shimeji's life is not as bad by any means as Oba's horribly tumultuous life. They are mirrors of each other in the fact that they're wandering through the chaos of life without a big guiding compass. Eventually, in the end, Shimeji must live alone, away from everyone else. Kind of similar to how Oba, in the end, has to live alone, though I do believe he has an old lady taking care of him or something. And besides the two, Shimeji eventually does find Majime in the end. Which, speaking of Majime, the Bible. There are lots of versions and translations of the Bible. It's pretty ubiquitous. I would assume that you know what it is. However, it plays into Shimeji Simulation very clearly near the end. And this is what Majime embodies, right? Being the opposite of Shimeji. So, Majime is in tune with herself, and she has a sort of creative confidence. And she mirrors biblical creation by forming her plushies into basic working societies. So, you know, the whole 7-day creation story, she kind of mirrors just with plushies. It's silly, but it very clearly connects her to that aspect of it. And along with that, too, she even sets up Shimeji to be a kind of Christ-like figure, you know, because Majime essentially goes into hiding and is like, listen, you know, when Shimeji appears, she will lead you to me. I don't think that Majime planned any of this purposefully, it just kind of happened. But it is showing the will to power at work here. There is a Shimeji-shaped hole in Majime's heart, so she sets out to create meaning through these plushies. It is a very interesting thought. Nischek's will to power also comes up again with Big Sis giving the people the power over their environments, and later, accidentally, over themselves. She consciously chose to do that. It's kind of like Dostoevsky's Crystal Palace. You know, if humans create a perfect society, or they're in a very nice simulation in this case, they will find a way to break that Crystal Palace or simulation just to prove that they have agency. But it's an interesting thought. Another thing I want to look at too, so once Big Sis gives everyone the power over themselves, chaos ensues as people essentially lose themselves in each other. There is no individual anymore. And this is interesting, because is true freedom and power bad? Do we need something like a god or a gardener to keep our lives ordered and functioning properly? It's an interesting thought, and I really don't have an answer for you on this. Going on from here, what is reality? This is something that is constantly questioned throughout Shimeji Simulation. Sis claims that they are in someone's dream, and that this world is a calculation. So, is their world real? Along with this, in Chapter 47, Shimeji is alone and dreams of better times with everyone. And then she wakes up and she is alone in her weird world area. She has trouble distinguishing which one is real and which one is the dream. And I have an ultimate theory as to what's actually going on here. However, Yomikawa states that novels and academic books are packed with restless meaning. And there is certainly a lot here, so I want to have a little interlude before I give my final thoughts on what's actually occurring within Shimeji Simulation, and what the story wants you to take away from it. This is a section for stuff I want to talk about, but I haven't a place for. I would have done this at the end, but I decided actually going over the heart of Shimeji Simulation would probably be a better thing to end on. So with that, the cats in Shimeji Simulation are generally really long. Even the normal ones are fairly longer than normal, and there are a great many cats that are just long. There are long cats It's very amusing. It's a little observation I made. I just want to talk about the long cats a little bit. They're great. The lobster and the eel friend are awesome. Just look at them. They look so happy together. It's a bit unlucky, but they both end up getting eaten. It's a little footnote, but I like them a lot. Shark Girl. So, I know I said Shimeji or the Gardener are the best characters, but I clearly forgot about Shark Girl. Shark Girl is by far the best character. She does not speak at all to my knowledge, and she has a big ol' shark. That's it. So what's actually happening in Shimeji Simulation? They're very clearly in some kind of computer simulation, right? We all know this. Sis refers to it as a dream, as a calculation. However, I think it's what could have been. And I'll explain this. So, now we need to turn to Girl's Last Tour, written by the same author. And in it, we follow Yuri and Cheeto. They travel through a mega city that is desolate and broken down. And along their journey, they only meet 2 other humans. It's a very good manga. I recommend reading it. Anyway. At one point, they manage to access a bunch of pictures that are within a camera they received. And in it, we can see Shimeji and Big Sis. Yuri and Cheeto also find data that suggests that humans were trying to launch rockets off of Earth, and one successfully managed to make it off. And in the end of Girl's Last Tour, both our main characters die, kind of. We don't see it. But it's pretty clear that their consciousness somehow make it into the simulation. We don't see them die, as I said. However, we do end with them in front of a very strange rock with some clear technology in it. So maybe their consciousnesses were sent to the simulation somehow. We do see them in Shimeji Simulation, after all. So, this rocket theory is supported by Yamikawa, and does give some interesting information regarding Girl's Last Tour. It explains a lot. She says, at some point in the history of human civilization, humanity was struck by a horrible epidemic. Following it, a war broke out. Human settlements were being wiped out one after another, and the situation looked pretty hopeless. Until one day, people found a way to continue existence by transferring human consciousness into a formula and placing it inside a supercomputer. Well, there we are then. Though she does claim to have a few other theories as to what existence is. In this case, it's better supported by both mangas that is what's going on. Yamikawa also states that there are angels or mutants, very powerful beings in the simulation, so her, the Gardener, and Big Sis. And all of them have been granted a part of God's power. So Yamikawa is obviously connected to knowledge and memory. She has all her books and stuff. And interestingly enough, unlike everyone else, once Sis grants people the power to change themselves, Yamikawa remains almost completely unaffected by the change, which is interesting. The Gardener is, well, a gardener. She maintains normalcy and keeps the simulation running well. Big Sis is change. She just appeared one day with Shimeji in a field. Shimeji doesn't question this sudden appearance, but Big Sis does. And she wanted to give everyone more freedom. And this makes another interesting connection back to Girl's Last Tour. They meet an AI in it, Yuri and Cheeto. And despite the AI having boundless freedom to do whatever it wants, it only wants to die. That is the one thing it can't do on its own. And it states that this freedom isn't necessarily a good thing. So once Sis makes the initial change, where people can, do stuff with the environment, there is text around Yamikawa, and it states that, if God is the personification of fate, then shall man through rebellion attain freedom, we resemble God. And it's kind of like the Crystal Palace. I believe I mentioned it earlier. If man is in a utopia, just to prove his agency, he will destroy said utopia. And I believe it to be a similar situation here. Despite all of this, the concepts, the story of Shimeji Simulation being a little confusing, it has one message at its core that's very plain to see. That is, relationships are incredibly important. It can be hard to communicate and express ourselves to others. After all,
we may call each other friend, but we cannot know each other so.
Are our friends actually our friends? It is difficult to talk to people. What does make a friend? that's honestly a question for you to answer. In Chapter 38, the whole digging club digs very deep. And at this point, the ground is determined to be our collective unconsciousness. And in it, they find what the manga describes as the kind of hole that exists in human hearts. And it is empty save for a torch. Perhaps this is Nietzsche's God-shaped hole in our hearts. The hole that we need to fill with meaning. And the manga suggests we fill it with people. Because in the end, despite Shimeji and Majime having basically limitless freedom and power to make and do anything they want, they really only want each other's company. And that's very nice. Well, I believe that's a fine note to end off on. So with that, I've been Sam, and thank you very much for listening. I hope to see you in the next one.